Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Noah. And Kathy, thank you for your introduction. And Vicky, as always, thank you for your wonderful opening. It's so thrilling to be here. So exciting that our topic is the future of work. I was reflecting that just on a personal level and what I'm involved in these days from ONN's perspective. It's really exciting that we're starting with this topic about the future of work because we're so into the issues as they affect the not-for-profit sector, and the questions about what the future workplace in the sector will look like are front and center for many of us. Personally, I turned 65 not very long ago, and one thing I've been reflecting on is just how my work, now that I have retired, is so different from the work of the generation before me. And when I look at the peers in my age cohort as well, their work is so different from people as recently as 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So all those things are changing rapidly. And when Noah was speaking, it reminded me that part of my reflection as being a parent of two young adults in their 20s, and I find myself frequently falling into the trap of berating them for not sending out enough resumes and not knocking on enough doors, and not really fully recognizing that their opportunities are very different from the opportunities that I had or the opportunities that people had as recently as 10 and 20 years ago. So I'm so excited to be here with two people who've been thinking about these issues, I think, much more than I have. So our structures, we're going to hear briefly from Amin and from Hilary. They'll each share some thoughts with us. And then we're going to engage in a bit of discussion. Now, we didn't really discuss who was going to go first, but Amin, why don't you give us some of your thoughts, because I know this is an issue that's been very close to your work.
Yeah, I've been working on these issues. Can you hear me? So I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing.
I think he'll turn you on.
You're on. Can you hear me now? I might be on, but I'm not.
There we go.
There we go. I'm totally on now. So I have been thinking about these issues for some time, and I'd like to thank the Atkinson Foundation for recognizing that the future of work is about the future of workers. My job as an economist has always been about putting people into the heart of the economy, putting the public back into public benefits and public policy. And so I'd like to start off by saying that Victoria's invocation for you to consider your role as leaders and Kathy's clarity on what the potential role of the not-for-profit sector is very well taken. Because as an economist and as a fan of economic history, I look over the course of the last few hundred years and think the future is not profit-driven. It's not non-profit-driven. And the reason is twofold: demographic change and climate change. The demographic change that some of you have talked about means that there's more people on the move than ever before, moving from places that are unlivable for a whole host of reasons, and coming to countries like Canada, which puts certain types of pressure on our sector, on the not-for-profit sector. The demographic change is perhaps more telling. In the global north, all countries are aging, none more rapidly than China because of its one-child policies of the 1980s. That changes the rate of economic growth. Growth in the future will be at half the rate of the last 20, 25 years. So that changes how we can deliver public services because of arithmetic reduction in our revenue base. And yet the need will be rising for two reasons, not just because there's going to be more seniors, but definitely the future of work is going to involve a lot more caring, everything from personal care workers right through to the highest trained technicians and surgeons and specialists and everything in between. But also, the working age population on which the seniors are going to rely and children are going to rely is getting smaller and smaller in relationship to these two groups of people that cannot work because of age. Now, it's true that 65 plus are working more than in the past, but you're not going to have a bunch of 80-year-olds working. And the population is aging. So how we support our working age population is critical because they support everybody else. And here, the public sector service provision, it's going to be critical that it becomes more efficient, more rapid, more nimble, but it won't be able to do it all. So the not-for-profit sector is going to be absolutely critical in making sure that the working age population is supported. But this gives you a little insight on where the future of work is going and the type of workers we're going to need. Because if the caring sector is going to be critical to the future growth of the economy, as it will be, because there's only so much that a working age population that is looking at dependency rates that look something like the 1960s, not quite there, but close to there, and yet with half the rate of economic growth, this population is going to have to be better served. The question becomes, therefore, if our public policies are actually putting the premium on skilling up Canadians to do those jobs, or if we're going to import our solution for this massive labor and skill shortage. Whether we're looking, and when we talk about importing the solution, whether we're talking about economic immigrants who are permanent residents, who can become citizens, or whether we're talking about temporary foreign workers that arrive here under a guise of entries, whether it's the temporary foreign worker program, the international mobility programs, or through trade agreements. All of these things are possible, and yet we don't have our policy coordinated to answer that question on one of the biggest growth sectors of the coming years. Who will be the workers of the future, and what kind of work will they have? So the focus on decent work for everybody providing this care and for the systems that support these workers is absolutely critical. One of the reasons why the ILO, as it approaches its 100th birthday next year, it has focused on decent work, because this push and pull of people from all over the world, we need them, so they have to come here. They need to leave for opportunity as well as escape. This push and pull of people will mean it's very easy to exploit people. So your eyes have to be on the ball on what kind of regulations and what kind of supports and legislation is in place to protect all workers doing all sorts of work. The second area that is going to be absolutely critical, partly because of climate change, but because we deferred fixing our infrastructure for over 25 years in favor of tax cuts. So we're now on a wave of infrastructure investment. It's the biggest we've seen in half a century, and certainly the biggest in, so relatively speaking, it's the biggest we've seen in half a century, and bigger in dollar volume than anything we've seen before. It's going to repair the infrastructure we've got, but it's also going to extend the infrastructure we've got. And at the federal level, there is a new piece of mandatory legislation that says any federally sponsored program over $25 million must have a community benefit agreement. Now, here's an opportunity, again, for your sector to provide leadership, to make sure that every dollar that comes into communities does double and triple duty, providing opportunities for work for young people and marginalized populations that would otherwise not get the training and job opportunities, to make sure that these investments in public infrastructure are actually improving our greenhouse gas emissions and are using energy as efficiently as possible, and starting to build community capital, community social capital. So your job can be to help prepare communities to negotiate these agreements and also make sure they do the best double and triple duty of our dollars being spent in our communities. So we are building community as we build community infrastructure. The third area in which you have to provide leadership is the growth in precarious employment. Now, both of the things that I mentioned, but particularly the growth in caring jobs that are going to be required, and the abrogation of supply chains, this kind of reconfiguration of where we get the stuff that we consume from, will require you all to keep your eyes open to see who is working under what conditions. There's going to be probably a growth in people working temporarily and through contingent work, because technology does permit us to unbundle jobs into tasks, and that unbundling of jobs into tasks means shorter and shorter contracts. The shorter the contracts are, the more competition there is for every single job. The more competition there is for every single job, the more cutthroat the competition gets. So there will be, and in the wake of this set of trends will be accelerating corporate concentration. We've seen it since 2008. So there's going to be some bully employers out there that are trying to get the most they can. Your job is to work with your community to keep your eyes on where exploitation is accelerating, and it will accelerate in your communities. So just make sure you're keeping your eyes open on it. If the goal on the future of work is to make sure all work is decent work, which we can create, we have done in the past. 100 years ago, we faced these same features, but now we are looking at exactly the same type of pressures in our communities. We can do this again, but we need your leadership as you serve the community and as you help to strengthen the community. Finally, the digital revolution is creating new norms in how we do public policy making. I would refer you to the extraordinary experiment that is underway in this city right now with Waterfront Toronto and Alphabet, Sidewalk Labs. And what that means to the blurring of lines between private and public sector decision making on how our communities will be built. This is not necessarily a bad thing. But we have to understand that private interests are not synonymous with public interest. Sometimes they overlap, and very strongly, to create growth and benefit for everybody. But sometimes private interests conflict with public interests. So who owns the data and how the data is used as we build our next wave of smart cities is incredibly critical. Again, your eyes and ears, your connections will help us build the most thriving communities that we can imagine with the assistance of technology. And so I guess I would finish my opening comments by saying it is a remarkable pleasure to be here in a community that I started my career as an economist with when I worked at the Social Planning Council of Metropolitan Toronto. Labor market issues are the issues that face your future, and the future of work is about the future of workers. I hope we can all work together to create the most magnificent future in Ontario. Thank you. I don't know what I did for time.
Perfect.
Oh, good.
I was just telling Armin that her timing was perfect, and indeed, Armin has given us a lot of really meaty subjects to think about. How much time do we have, Kathy? Can we keep going to lunch? I'm already thinking. We're only just getting started. So thank you so much. You certainly have given us a lot to reflect upon. And now I'd like to turn over to you, Hilary.
Thank you.
Hear about the incredible digital work that you've been doing with the Government of Ontario.
Thank you, Robin. And thanks, Armin, for really setting the stage and providing a lot of context. And I will go a little bit deeper into the last piece you were touching on, although as a government official, I probably will stay away from the topic of Sidewalk Labs at the moment. But you know, just sort of thinking about digital and what that means, not just to government, but I think to the future of work. When we talk about digital, yes, it's usually going to end up with something that hopefully is making government easier to interact with, whether you're trying to get information or whether you're trying to complete a transaction or get service from the government. And in this day and age, we are in a digital world. That likely means we're trying to enable you to do the same thing you would do if you realized you needed toilet paper and couldn't go to the store. You know, you might pull out your phone. You might be on your couch with an iPad. You might be at work in front of your computer. Yes, so we might build something that you can interact with digitally. But for me and for the work that we do, it's very, very important for us to set the stage that that's just the outcome. That's the implementation. But how we get there is what, quote unquote, digital is really about. It's about culture change. It's about how are we prepping folks in the public service? How are we teaching our teams to think differently about getting to those outcomes? You know, and about not making assumptions that you know, we know what's best, we know what information we need to provide, but how do we do that differently? And there's a few pillars that we generally talk about. And the reason I'm sort of focusing even just on the basics of what digital means to us is because I feel like it's incredibly important to get some of those fundamentals right in our organization and with sort of the how we work, so that in the near future, as we are co-workers with AI or anything else, as how some of the work that is part of our organization gets done changes, there's a foundation there that we are building on. And so, we talk a lot about openness and what openness really means and how you work in the open, what open source can do for us. Just this idea that when you make things open, you make things better. And so whether that's making sure that we're talking about the work that we're doing, we're talking about failure, we're talking about not just success and milestones, but what we're learning, and the notion of continuous improvement, doing that in the open. So it's not just me and my team that's learning from our mistakes, but so that you can too, so that anyone can not have to make the same mistakes again. I've got a pin on my backpack over there that says only new mistakes. So only make new mistakes. Try to learn from everyone else's mistakes. So just the notion of openness and really everything that can change when you, with your organization, when you can change that perspective of how you work. The notion of trying to be data-driven or data-informed. I had a great conversation just yesterday about what does that really mean? What's the role of intuition? When you're trying to be more data-driven and when you're trying to use data for decision-making. And our last minister in a meeting once said, I've got all the data in the world in front of me, but none of the data I need to make a decision. And so how do you sort of use different layers and different filters and intuition and people and the feedback loops to then narrow down how you are going to use data to make a decision? But we have to use data. We have to be data informed. And we have to do that so that we know what the data is. Because as we get further and further away from whatever is creating and then using the data, i.e. as we move further toward robotic process automation or anything else that is going to involve machine learning, it's incredibly important that we have our heads wrapped around the data that we have access to, that we need to use, and that is informing our systems and our decision making. Third is, I think, touched on it a little bit, but just the notion of talent. And how are we going to train and support the workforce that is, honestly, in many different sectors, it does feel more and more precarious. And even on my team, it's a good percentage of our team that is on contract. And they could have that contract renewed over and over and over again. But when they go to a bank and try to get a mortgage, it's seen as precarious. And it's seen as a situation that wouldn't make them viable for that service or a viable part of the community worth investing in, if you will. And so how do we support talent? How do we train the folks in the language of digital and in the ways of digital so that we can also, again, work side by side with and build all of the new processes and build in the automation that we do need. We need to have people refocused and doing more meaningful work. And yes, find one thing in your organization and try to automate it. It will save you headaches, it will save you time, and you can refocus your energy. But again, how do we get there, and how do we upskill folks in order to be more, to be able to sort of make that change and make that pivot. And then I think building on the notion of talent and training, and it informs the rest of it for me, is the unfortunate buzzword these days, at least in the tech industry, of diversity and inclusion. And I very much believe that is not a buzzword, that is at the heart of what my mission is about, is how do we build a workforce, and how do we do that in a way that is diverse. So that's about representation, and it's about making sure that our team looks like the people that we serve. looks like Ontario. It represents the folks and the needs of the businesses and the people and the communities in Ontario that we're trying to build solutions for. And then inclusion is about how are they engaged, and how are they engaged with our work and with our team. The missing piece there often, especially when we're talking about talent and training and how do we support those people and support our people and support the staff, is belonging. And we often stop with diversity and inclusion, but I try to tack on belonging when I talk about these things, because you can do all the hard work of making sure that your talent pools that you're recruiting from and that you end up interviewing are diverse, and that there are candidates in there that are going to bring that perspective to your organization, which study after study shows helps you be better and make better products. You can do all the work of trying to make sure that people are engaged and and feel included and are able to do their work in the best way. But if they're not supported, and if they don't feel like they belong, then they're not going to stick around, and all that work will be for naught. So we have to. It's absolutely part of talent training. How do you develop people? How do you support people? And how do you make sure that they want to continue doing the work that you've worked so hard to enable them to do? And so those things I feel like are really absolutely critical to get right, not just in the digital context, but in this context of folks moving around a lot. As you said, you can hop from contract to contract very easily, but they've got to be able to kind of slip in to a context that allows them to get things done. And on the technology side of things, if we're not building products with a diverse team, bringing lots of lenses and their own experiences to that work, we're gonna fail, and we're gonna fail big time as we get closer and closer to automation and machine learning. If the machines are learning from a table that looks like me, it's only going to have one experience. It's only going to have one set of data. We have to make sure that our staff, that our teams, that we have diverse teams working on this stuff and working on these products and working on these issues, or the next round of kind of what we're in for is going to be, I think, even worse than some of the things we've seen today. With certain machine learning algorithms, not understanding what you mean by something because it's only been a subset of people that have programmed it, that have worked on it, that have seen the errors and seen how it spits out information, and it works for them. It seems right to them, but you bring more people in with more experiences and that look different and have different experiences and different backgrounds, and you're going to get a better outcome.
Thank you so much, Hilary. So again, as we can see, a lot of really complex issues for us to reflect upon on all these issues. Well, one thing I was thinking about as you were both speaking was that from a not-for-profit organization perspective, many of these issues clearly have advantages and disadvantages, and the challenge for us often in the sector is to figure out what is the right balance for us. So for example, the whole issue of precarious work. All of us know intuitively in our gut, in our values level, that precarious work is not a good thing. It doesn't help young people grow and develop and build stability in their lives and a good quality of life. On the other hand, in cash-strapped not-for-profit organizations where you only get a little bit of money to do a contract, you end up hiring somebody for that one-year contract because that's the only way you can get the work done. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how, so that's just one example. Another example I was thinking about is, as you were both speaking, is the aging of the population, an issue that's close to my heart, where you have people who still have a lot to offer and like to be able to have some degree of work and have and can contribute. On the other hand, may arguably be blocking entry opportunities for younger folks or for more inexperienced folks in those organizations. So a lot of these issues about the changing nature of work seem to have advantages and disadvantages for us in the not-for-profit sector. And I just wonder if you have any reflections on how does one seek to get that balance right?
I don't know that I know the answer, honestly. But I think that, at least from my perspective and the type of team that we're trying to build and the type of work that we're trying to support, there's certainly a sense of how do we have to shift even the way that the public service organizes itself and brings folks together for teams. I mean, and I think you can extract that and kind of extrapolate that same issue. So we're essentially struggling with, the concept that, in each ministry I have a certain number of FTEs, but we've just got big projects we have to get done. And so does the way that we're currently structured, does the Westminster model, if you will, support that idea of how do we bring people together in a sort of agile or ad hoc way to quickly get something done, similar to the notion of I've got a limited amount of funds and I've got a year to do it. So that notion of teaming, I think, is critical for people who are building teams and who are trying to get work done in a different way to think about. And we're trying to rally around this concept of mission-based teams. How do we bring folks together quickly, empower and enable them to understand what their outcome is and work toward that in kind of an iterative way. And when they're done, be able to check back in and say, okay, what's next? So it's different from that notion that when they're done, they still have a job. I understand that. But I think that we all can be thinking about that idea of how do we try to staff things? How do we try to build things and get folks together? How do we pool resources? It's things we're trying to think about in the public service as well.
I want to piggyback on that and say that there are certain things that we're going to be doing in the next 10 years, the next 15 years, that are going to be project-based. Mm-hmm. And there will be lots more pilots, for example, in the sector, because we're trying stuff out. And there is a growing use of pools, talent pools, at the federal level of government, where people are fully employed, but they get allocated. So you might want to think sectorally. If you want to create a talent pool, for the not-for-profit sector, sector by sector, say training, say housing, say climate change work, I don't know, aging, that you could do it sector by sector. However, quite apart from the one-offs, the project-based, like hit the ground running and go, is what I was trying to say is over the next 10 years, next 15 years, we have known steady state increases in demand for service because of population aging, both for seniors as well as very young people. If you've got a shrinking working age population and you're asking them to work, who's taking care of the kids? Or are we just saying, hey, we don't need to have any more kids? So somebody's got to be taking care of the kids. Somebody's got to be taking care of people that are ill and older. Both those caring populations, the demand for labor is going to grow. What is our strategy for answering that demand? Is it going to be private sector driven? Is it going to be public sector supported? How are we going to have accessibility and affordability built into it? So I think there's huge sector, and the infrastructure story I told you, I didn't get out of my mouth, that over the next 10 years we have got, I said it's the largest investment, public investment in infrastructure in half a century. It approaches $700 billion. That's almost $750 billion. There's no private sector investment that is on the books right now that is going to pump this kind of money into the community. What are we doing to make sure every job is a living wage? Every job, there's no subcontracting out that permits you to pay somebody at below the minimum wage. There's plenty of money that is going to be moving through the economy that this sector can demand. All of those jobs are good jobs. And if you do that, if you become the voice for decent work, as you did with your, the innovation in your pension plan, which was fantastic. You could create more innovations that simply keep sending home the message that every person that is working has to be working a decent job because we can't support the rest without it. You have to be the leaders in that voice. So whether it's a 65-plus-year-old that's working because they can't afford not to work because their pension disappeared in 2008, or because they lost defined benefit pension plans, or any number of other reasons because they're healthy and they want to work and they have lots to contribute, or whether that person's 20 years old and has never had a job opportunity, that doesn't matter. What matters is there's going to be more work than we know what to do with. What's our plan for how we replace the people that are leaving, how we deal with labor shortages and skill shortages? Are we importing the solution? Are we upskilling our own population? And is every job a good job? That's something you guys can talk about over and over and over again. You are the leaders in your community. You can't just kind of turn a blind eye to cutting corners on what is going to be critical for the next generation of workers in this province to be at their full potential and to be paid their full value.
Thank you. Very powerful challenge to the sector. And I certainly am one who've always believed that there has never been any major shift in public policy or in values without the not-for-profit sector taking leadership on it when you look back over the last decades. I think that having said that, you've thrown out a great challenge about the role that the sector could be playing in trying to ensure that there is decent work going forward, and particularly taking advantage of these opportunities that are arising with changing demographics. I guess a question that I have that would build on that, and I'll open this up to either of you, is what leverage do we have as the sector to, and this is, I don't have an opinion on that, but to try to encourage, to facilitate, to lead both the government sector and the corporate sector in ensuring that we do provide decent work?
Oh, I have no problem answering that.
Yeah.
I think ONN and all its constituent members are better positioned than actually the public sector in defining what is public benefit and actually articulating where we're trying to head when it comes to achieving decent work, because the government has to balance business interests as well as so-called public interests, right? It's a balancing act for government. But for you, this is your mission. Your mission is to define what does the not-for-profit future look like. I said at the outset that for hundreds of years, the goal of society seemed to be generating profit. That's not going to be the case going forward. We can't meet the societal demands of population aging and climate change. Demographic change and climate change cannot be a profit-driven, cannot be met with profit-driven mission statements. And so clearly, the ONN is about articulating what does a non-profit-driven set of missions look like? What are we trying to achieve when we talk about building thriving communities? What are the elements of that? And it's your members coming together, just as you came together to figure out how to do a pension plan, you need to do a public benefit plan. And you need to be very articulate and up people's faces, because there's nobody else that plays that role in society. Absolutely none. And I can't think of any other province, I might be sadly mistaken, but I can't think of another province where you've got such a big sector, so well organized, working with so many sponsors to get your message through to government and to the public. So, over to you.
I think you're quite right. There's no question that there isn't another certainly your messages are resonating, no question. I think you're right that there is not another province that is either has a sector that is as strong or as well organized, or really a network like ONN. that brings people together like this to talk about common issues. I'd like to come back to the digital discussion for a moment, and again reflecting specifically on the challenges and opportunities in the not-for-profit sector, and where it strikes me that again on the one hand, so many of these issues it strikes me are both challenge/opportunities. So in the case of technology, for sure opportunities to deliver certain kinds of services more efficiently. Probably not, well, I shouldn't say probably not many of the direct caring services, but certainly a lot of the supporting services that lead to that. At the same time, in the not-for-profit sector, we usually have very limited dollars for capital investment, and often funders have limited capacity to provide capital investment in computer digital related investment. Do you have thoughts on and I know that you come mainly from a public sector perspective, but you've obviously been a member of the community and worked closely with a number of not-for-profit organizations. Do you have thoughts about how the not-for-profit sector could be, again, trying to optimize that balance?
Well, I think it looks probably fairly similar to the public sector trying to balance it as well. To be frank, government writ large has not. This is not just in Ontario, it's federal government, it's the states in the US, the federal government in the US. The federal government has relied so much on partners and on vendors, and they haven't done the hard work both to invest in the infrastructure, but also in people, which is a huge part of the infrastructure that's got to keep it going. And if you take a look at at typical service providers doing digital things today. For instance, if you go to any basic e-commerce website, Amazon.com does not look today like it looked last week, or like it looked, definitely like it looked a year ago, let alone last week. Because they're invested in making sure that they are continuously improving and continuously serving the people that are coming there. And government hasn't had the luxury to do that. We don't have the capital investment dollars. We don't have the training budgets. We don't have the means necessary to do that in an effective way. So what we're trying to do is actually sort of say, there are ways to get this done. And there are ways to get it done cheaply, effectively, and in a continuous way. And I think that the nonprofit sector needs to be looking sort of through the same lens, whether it's through partnerships or whether it's through pooling or whether it's through different ways of saying how can we tackle some of these fundamental issues together, whether that's with government, whether that's with each other. It feels very similar to me, though my background is definitely mostly public sector focused. I think we're facing some of the same challenges.
I want to echo what you're saying, and to ask this room, how many of you went through amalgamation in the 1990s? So this is what we're looking at kind of when it comes to digital, is pooling resources, right? Trying to figure out whether ONN or some subset of ONN is the appropriate way to pool resources, whether it's a talent pool where people are permanently employed but can have revolving contracts within it, or whether it's something like website services. Because if you're all of you, I don't know how many organizations are here, 400 you said or something, 500 organizations, if you're all doing websites, is there not like some kind of economies of scale of bringing them all together to have some resource that could work to customize services for you, but is constantly at the cutting edge of how do I deliver those services better online with you? And you could even have like interchange with government, as government is upping its game on service delivery, so that you're learning from one another about what the needs are on the ground in real time. So I think there's a real role, a coordinating role for ONN to play, but maybe subgroups within ONN, people that are working in the climate change sector, people that are working in the arts, people that are working in immigration settlement services, people working in housing, like get together and try and figure out, are there ways of actually advancing the work that you're doing together online so that you're saving costs? So it's the same thing as when we all bunked in together when we were renting the same space, right? Remember that? But doing it online, and I guess I would extend that to access to big data. So there's a lot of people in this room that could benefit from understanding the data that is in their sector better, but you don't have a lot of researchers in a lot of your organizations. I joined the Social Planning Council in 1987 because I was the first economist they had ever hired. The role of the Social Planning Council was to support United Way and city-funded human resource agencies in Toronto because they didn't have the capacity to do research. You might want to consider using some mechanisms to get really good at big data analysis for your sectors. And maybe perhaps working with, coordinating a purchase of somebody at StatCan so that they become your Sherpa on what kind of data you can ask for, what kind of data you can manipulate at the census tract level so you can see who you are serving at very small levels. So both from a website and kind of client-facing, outward-facing point of view, as well as an inward-facing, what are we doing and who are we doing it for and what are the emerging needs, you need to pool your resources. You can't do this one organization at a time. So you have to figure out how you're going to move forward on that.
Yeah, I think, Kathy, our work on the quality of work, the future of work, decent work, I can see it continuing for a generation because it is so important and so valuable. I think I can't believe how the time has flown. I think we're really essentially out of time. I'm going to ask our panelists for a 30-second, if there was one message you want to leave ONN and the not-for-profit sector with in 30 seconds. If you want to repeat something you've said already, that's fine too. Hillary?
For us, it always comes back to people and how we can work together. And I think that Armin's message has articulated that very well for this group. And how do we involve folks in that collaboration and in that co-design and in putting new ideas out together. The tagline for the conference essentially echoes every speech I ever give lately and some of the themes in our digital action plan, which is we have to be bold and we have to put people at the center, start with them, and deliver together. So I think that's a great message.
That's very good. Thank you, Hillary.
So in the past 3 years, all the international institutions like the IMF, OECD, World Bank, they're all talking about inclusive growth. What on earth do they mean? Why did they add the word inclusive to growth? Because they're talking about putting people at the center. Mm-hmm. Growth for growth's sake, without it actually trickling down to everybody and improving people's lives, does not work. So when I say the future is not profit-driven, it is non-profit-driven. And you are the face of that. And you have to be willing to take on the mantle of leadership in a whole new way of thinking about the future and articulating it for all of us to see what it means to be non-profit driven and to be driven by people at the center. So good luck.
Thank you. I think our panelists have thrown a tremendous challenge to the sector, and when I look around the room and I think about the conversations that I've been having in breaks and what have you, you know what, I think we have the right people in the room to actually do that. Right. So thank you. This has been amazing. I'm going to call on my board colleague, Gina Uppal, who's going to wrap up the session for us.
Thank you, Robin. Hello, everyone. My name is Gina Uppal, and I sit on the ONN board as well as work for Mars Discovery District. Can we please give this panel another round of applause?